Moto Guru. In this video, I'm going to guide you through how to use the Garmin Basecamp user interface for Mac. Being familiar with the user interface is going to be extremely useful in later videos when we look at tasks such as route planning. So the first thing we need to do is view the more detailed map. Now, I've shown how to do this on a previous video I created, which is how to download and install Garmin Basecamp for Mac, but I'm going to go over it again here briefly just for completeness. So the first thing I'm going to do is zoom in on the United Kingdom and then on London. Now you'll see the map has almost no detail, so that's not going to be very useful for route planning, and that's because it's displaying what's called the global map. The global map is a free map provided by Garmin so that when you install Basecamp it at least displays something. If the global map wasn't included, it would just display a blank screen. But as you can see, the global map has almost no detail, so it's not going to be useful for route planning. So we really need to see the more detailed maps. Now there's two easy ways you can view those. Firstly, you can plug your device into the computer, as I have, and it appears there under my Garmin devices, and then the maps installed on the device are available to use within Garmin Express. So I have City Navigator North America and also City Navigator Europe. Secondly, you can install the map from your device to the computer, and this is really useful because then you can use the map without having to plug in your device every time. So in order to do that, we need to install Garmin Express, connect our device to Garmin Express, and then click on More Options, Install Map to Computer, and there at the bottom there it says Install to Computer. So once you've done that, then those maps will be available under the Maps menu here. So I've got City Navigator Europe and also City Navigator North America. So I'll click on City Navigator Europe. And that now shows the more detailed map. So while we're here, let's also customize the toolbar so it permanently shows which map we're using. So I'm going to right click on the toolbar space and click down to Customize Toolbar. And you see on the right here, we've got a drop down for currently displayed map. So I can drag that up to the toolbar there, release, and click on Done. And now whichever map we're using is going to be displayed in this drop down. So if I flip this back to global map, it'll go back to the undetailed map, and I'll go back to City Navigator Europe, and now it's back to detail. So if you've just loaded up Basecamp and you're wondering why you can't see the correct map, have a quick look up in this section here, and then you can choose the correct map. Next, let's look at how to change units. So depending on where you are in the world, you may wish to use different units. The United States of America and the United Kingdom, for example, use miles, whereas Belgium and the Netherlands use kilometers. Also, you may wish to use specific units depending on the activity you're carrying out. So, for example, if you were cycling, you may prefer to work in kilometers. So to change units, we go up to the Basecamp menu and we click on Preferences. Then under the General group, we can change units by changing the value here under Measurement Unit. So it's currently set to US. Now I can change that to metric, and the map will refresh, and you'll see the scale on the map has now changed to kilometers. I can also change that to custom and click on advanced, and now I can set units for each of these values. And there's some additional choices here. So for example, under distance and speed, I've now got nautical miles, both with feet and meters. And then I can change things like the elevation to meters, the depth to meters, and perhaps the temperature to Celsius. And then click on OK. This also brings up the map features box. I can click on OK to close that as well. And now those units are set. If you've made changes to the units and you just want to reset them to the default settings, you can click on Reset Factory Defaults at the bottom here and click on Restart, and that will restart Basecamp with the default settings. It's important to note that changing units only changes how the data is displayed. It doesn't change the data that sits underneath. And I'll show you a quick example of what I mean. So if I close out of here and I create a quick route, note that the units are still set to nautical miles. I'm going to click on the route tool and I'm going to create a route from North London to South London. There we go. So now if I double click on that route in my collection and click on directions, you'll notice in the right hand column here, total distance, or total D, is showing in meters and nautical miles. So the total distance is 8.2 nautical miles. And if I click on info, it shows me there total distance 8.2 nautical miles. Now, if I go and change the units, I go to Basecamp Preferences and change the units from custom to metric. The view refreshes, and now if I close preferences again and again open my route and go to directions, you'll see that the distance is now in meters and kilometers, and the total distance is 15.1 kilometers. And just for completeness, I'll change it back to miles. So preferences, go from metric to US. Again, the view refreshes, close that out, and again open the route, directions, and now we've got feet and miles, and the total distance is 9.4 miles. So the point I'm making is that changing the units doesn't actually change the raw data, just how it's displayed. So you can make changes to the units if you like, and you don't have to worry about damaging the data. Next, let's look at the toolbar, which runs across the top of the screen. I touched on this briefly when we were loading the more detailed map, where I right-clicked on it and chose Customize Toolbar and added the currently displayed map section to the toolbar. That's the only change I would really make here. All of the icons that are on there are pretty useful, and they're all pretty well laid out, so I wouldn't change anything else on there if you want to, but you can move these around should you wish. So I'm going to click on Done. So in terms of the icons that are on there, let's look at these briefly. So device transfer up, this is for sending things to your device. So as we progress and I go through a few more videos and we create some routes and tracks and so on, that's one way of sending them to the device. You can also send things to the device by right-clicking and choosing Send to Device. Next is transfer from the device. So once your device is plugged into the computer, you can load routes and waypoints and things from the device onto the computer. You can also do that manually by selecting the device, choosing it, and then copying or pasting it into a list. Next, let's look along at the launcher. So this displays the task launcher, which loads when you load Basecamp, where you can choose one of these options like planning a trip or downloading satellite imagery. Moving along from there, we have Garmin Adventures. So this is where you can share tracks and adventures you've done with a Garmin community. Trip Planner, which is next, so you can plan a trip between multiple locations using that. And then we have the download bird's eye imagery. So if you're using different types of navigators, the Zumo doesn't support this, but some of the other ones like the walking navigators, you can download satellite imagery if you like to the device. So if you were going to walk in a specific place like a woodland, you can download the satellite imagery for that, and then you'll have it with you when you're on the trail. Next, let's look at activity. Activities influence what's displayed on the map and how routes are calculated. The easiest way to see this is to go down to Manage Activities, and that opens this screen which says selecting an activity allows you to customize the way Basecamp works by creating routes that are tailored to your activity and also allowing the map to display information more relevant to you. So for example, if I click on driving and click on Edit Map Display Preferences, I can change which features display on the map for this particular profile. So let's say if I'm driving, I may not want to look at shopping, and maybe I'm not that interested in marine also, so I can uncheck those. And now when I'm using the driving profile, those won't appear on the map. I can move this down to motorcycling and then set the features for motorcycling. So again, let's remove shopping and maybe recreation, because if I'm on my bike, it's already recreation. I don't need to look for recreation things to do. So I'll click on OK and save those changes and close from there. The next thing we can do within managing activities is change the route preferences. So if I click on this icon here, Edit Route Preferences, you can see the route preferences that are set up for driving. So the calculation mode is the fastest time, and the only avoidance is unpaved roads. Now, if I change the activity to motorcycling, you'll see that the road type avoidances have changed. So now it's choosing to avoid interstates and major highways. So you may or may not wish to have those types of road avoidances for that profile, and you can change them here. Just for comparison, if I change to walking, now interstates are avoided, which is probably just as well, but unpaved roads are allowed. So you can change these settings to suit the activity you want to do. As we move on for route planning and route plotting, I'll show you which is best to use. It's normally driving, because when you're plotting a route within Basecamp, you want the least amount of avoidances as possible, except for perhaps unpaved roads. So I'll close there and move on to currently displayed maps. So we did touch on this earlier. You can choose from the maps that are available to you with the devices that are plugged in and those that are installed on your computer. The global map is the sparse map, which is just to get Basecamp running, and the others are the more detailed maps. So if I change to City Navigator North America, that's now panned over America, and now I have the detailed map for North America. So let's zoom in on Miami. And now you see we've got the detailed map for Miami. Next, let's look at the buttons which sit within the Map Tools group. And firstly, let's look at the Hand tool. So if I select the Hand tool and move down to the map, I can now pan across the map by holding down the left mouse button and moving my mouse left, right, or up and down. But this tool actually does quite a lot more than that. So if I select the route I created earlier, and we've still got the hand tool, and now I hover over one of the points within the route, you'll see it changes from a hand to a sort of pointer. Now if I hold down the left mouse button, I can move that point to elsewhere on the map like so, and the route recalculates. I can do that for the end point as well, move that elsewhere on the map, and again the route recalculates. I can also use this tool to insert a point within the route. So if we go perhaps halfway between the start and the end points, just hover over that. Again, you see it's changed to a sort of pointer. If I hold down the left mouse button and drag that, you see we get these snap lines over to here. It will insert a point within the route. So you can use the hand tool not only to pan around the map, but also to move points on a route and insert points into a route. We can also use the hand tool to move points and insert points on a track. So if I quickly create a track between 2 points, and now select the hand tool. As before, if you hover over a point on the track, it changes to a sort of pointer. Now, if I hold down the left mouse button, I can drag that point to elsewhere on the map. Similarly, if I hover over a point within the track, for example, midway, the hand now changes again to a pointer. And again, if I hold down the left mouse button, I can drag and release, and that inserts a new point within the track. Next, let's click on the magnifying glass, which is the zoom tool. So when the zoom tool is selected, if you click on the left mouse button, it will zoom in. And if you click on the right mouse button, if you have one, it will zoom out. You can also use the zoom tool to box around certain sections. So if I go up to here near wood green and I hold down the left mouse button and create this square and release, it will zoom in on that particular section. So that's a particularly useful tool to have. Next, let's move to the select tool. So with a select tool, as the name suggests, you can select things. So you can select routes, you can select points within a route. If you had a waypoint, let me just create one quickly here. You can use the select tool to select that waypoint, for example, either on the map or within the list. You can also use the select tool to move points around like we did with the hand tool. So if I go and hover over this point on the route here and hold down the left mouse button, I can move that point to elsewhere on the map. And I can also use the pointer tool to insert points on a route. So let me show the route on the map. Again, if I choose the select tool and go halfway down the route and hold down the left mouse button, I get some snap lines and I can insert a point on the route from there. So also a useful tool. The measuring tool here can be used to measure distances between 2 points. So let's say I wanted to measure from here to here. I simply left click and left click again, and it tells me that that distance. So that's 4.63 miles. The measure tool can also be used to calculate areas. So if I zoom in on Regent's Park, which is there, and select the measure tool and just click around the perimeter of Regent's Park, as I click around it, that sort of purple speech bubble at the end shows the total distance I've clicked, and underneath the area between the points I've clicked. So once we've gotten right the way around the park, it says it's 3.08 miles around and 0.67 square miles in area. So let's go and check that. It shows up as 166 hectares, So let's copy that and find out what that is in square miles. So 166 hectares is 0.64 square miles, which is pretty close to we got 0.67. So it's a reasonably accurate way of estimating areas and quite a useful tool perhaps if you were looking at the area around your house, for example. Next, let's look at the buttons that sit within the Creation Tools group. Now, we will look at these in a lot more detail as we progress to videos on route planning, but for now, I'll just touch on them briefly. So firstly, we have the waypoint tool. This tool is used to create waypoints on the map. So if I zoom in, let's go and zoom in on central London and Hyde Park and click on the waypoint tool, I can place a waypoint in the park. And that opens the waypoint properties box. And from here, I can give it a name, or change the existing name. I can view the position. I can add address information. So for example, if this was maybe someone's house or a monument or attraction, you can add address information. And also I can click on references. On references, it shows you which routes this waypoint is part of and which lists it's part of, which I'll explain further when we look at the filing system. You can also give the waypoint a category. So if I just type in park, and then a comma, that's now been categorized as a park type of waypoint, if you like. So you can place these wherever you like. You can place them on roads, in parks, and on monuments and things as well. Next, let's look at the route tool. So if I click on this, create a route, that opens the new route dialog box, and from here you can simply click X and start drawing, or if you have a specific point you want the route to start at, you can drag a waypoint onto there as the start point, and let's drag the other waypoint onto there as the end point, and that will now plot a route between those. So there's the route between those two waypoints. We can also, if I click on close, and again click on create a route again and click on X, I can just start drawing. So now I can just start plotting what we call shaping points on the route from here. So you can use either method, and as I say, I will go into this in a lot more detail in the route planning videos. And finally, we have the option here to create a track. So a track is different to a route in that a route has navigation instructions. It shows you how to get from point A to point B via the points you've added to the route. A track is just a series of points in order. It doesn't contain any routing information. So I could create a track from here down to here and so on. And that's just, yeah, a track. So as you can see, it doesn't have any routing information. If I double click on the track as well, you'll see it just is a list of points with details of where they are. Whereas if I click on the route here, it actually has route directions and so on. So that's the difference between the two. The reason you may wish to create a track rather than a route, perhaps you're sending it to someone who doesn't have a device with a trip planner and you just want to send them an outline of the track so they can view that on their device. That may be a reason to do that. A track won't recalculate either, so when you send that to a user's device, it just shows up as it is, whereas if you send them a route, it will tend to recalculate based on the settings of that device. But as I say, we will get into that in a lot more detail in the route plotting videos. So moving along to the right, I have the overview map. So if I click on that, it opens this small window here, which shows what I'm looking at in the context of the broader map. So that square there, the sort of grey square, is what's currently being displayed in the bigger window. And I can grab a hold of this map and move it around from there, and it will pan around what I'm currently viewing. So if I choose the zoom tool and let's zoom out a bit more, you'll see that grey box changes shape depending on where we're looking at. So now I can see the whole of central London, and within the overview map I can see the whole of the UK and pan around it as such. So that's kind of useful if you're looking to pan around the map while you're route plotting or so on. You can close that by clicking the X. And next there are the notifications. This will notify you of events within Basecamp. So for example, if you're working within the global map but you've plugged in your device, sometimes this will prompt you to switch to the map on the device. Things like that is useful for. And then on the very right there is search. So this search is the context of the map you're currently displaying. So again, let's zoom in on London, where we were doing our bit of route planning. Let's go into Hyde Park again. So within here, you can search for anything you like, really. So I could put in restaurant and hit enter, and that's going to search for restaurants within the current map that I'm displaying. So the top result there is the Serpentine Bar and Kitchen, which is a cafe within Hyde Park. You could also search here for maybe fuel, and this will show you fuel stations on the map you're currently browsing. So we have Esso, Gulf, and Shell. So when you're done searching, to get rid of this window on the left, you need to go down to the bottom right here and click on these binoculars, click on those, and then that will disappear and you're back to browsing the map. Now let's move to the map controls at the bottom of the screen. So when you hover over these become more visible. The left section here, set of arrow keys, lets you pan around the map. The zoom slider here just enables you to zoom in and out, and the detail slider determines how much detail is shown on the map. So if I move this all the way to the right, it will show full detail on the map, including all the small streets. And if we zoom in a bit more, it will start to show like restaurants and things. And there we go. So restaurants and hotels and ATMs and so on. So an awful lot of detail, probably too much to actually be useful. Having that around the middle is normally ideal. You can also move it all the way to the left and have hardly any detail. That's all. Under this section here, it says show labels and overlays. So if I move that to the left and remove show labels, then things like street labels and names and so on will disappear. And if I uncheck overlays, if you had any overlays displaying, they would disappear as well. So let's move that back to the center. If you click on the sprocket here, that brings up the display preferences menu, which we saw earlier. So we can change the map features showing for the current profile, which is driving, and you can change these sliders as well to change the size of icons and the size of labels and so on. So moving to the right of that, we have the compass. So the map is currently orientated with north pointing up, but you can change that with this sort of slider. So you can move it around, and now east is at the top, and move it around again, and now south is at the top. Quite why you'd want to do that, I don't know, but you can. To reset the orientation, if you go up to this nice blue arrow on the top left and click on it, that will reset the map with north pointing up. So those are the map controls. Next, let's move on to the Basecamp filing system, which sits on the left of the window in these three panes. Now, before we continue, I just want to emphasize that it does take a little bit of time to learn and figure out the Basecamp filing system. But once you've spent that time learning, it's very straightforward and easy to use. At its core, it works in much the same way as Finder does on a Macintosh computer, in that you have folders and files. So first, let's look at the three panes. So the top pane here, My Garmin Devices, displays the devices that are currently connected to your computer. So there's my Zumo 590, and it has within it an SD card. The middle section, On My Computer, displays the data that's currently saved on your computer within Basecamp, and the window at the bottom displays what's currently selected. So I've currently selected My Collection, and these are the waypoints and routes which we've been creating and working with as we've progressed through the video. If I click on my Zumo 590 at the top here, then the display changes and it shows all of the waypoints and routes that currently sit on my Zumo 590. So you can click on different things, and what's within them will display in this bottom window. So next, let's look at organization. Within the filing system, we organize things into folders and lists. So My Collection is the root level folder, if you like. If I right click on that and choose New List Folder, I can create a subfolder. So let's call it Example Folder 1. And within that folder, I can create lists. So I'm going to create a new list here and call it List 1. And I'm going to create another list and call it List 2. So from a hierarchical point of view, And we use folders for organizing, and lists sit within folders, and lists contain route data, waypoints, and tracks. So that's how the hierarchy works. So now I've selected list 1, I can create some things within that list. So I'm going to create some waypoints. So I'm going to click on the waypoint tool, and I'm going to create a waypoint in Regent's Park. I'm going to create a waypoint in Kensington Gardens, and I'm going to create a waypoint in Holland Park. So there we go. So now we've got 3 waypoints within that list. Now I'm going to select list 2 and create some more waypoints. So I'm going to create a waypoint in St James's Park, and I'm going to create another waypoint in Green Park, and then a final waypoint in Battersea Park. So you see now these lists contain different data. If I click on My Collection, which is the route folder, you'll see that all the waypoints I've created also sit within there. So when you create a waypoint in a list, the way it works is it's created in My Collection and it displays within the list. And then within the list, if you delete a waypoint, you've got 2 options. So if I was to delete the Holland Park waypoint, I can right click on it and I have 2 options. Delete, which will delete it from the list, but it will remain in My Collection, and delete from My Collection, where it will be permanently deleted, although you can create it again later. So if I was to delete Holland Park from there, you see it's no longer in the list, but if I go into My Collection, you see Holland Park is still there, and I can copy that and paste it back into the list. There we go. If I was to choose delete from My Collection, that's now deleted permanently. So if I go back to My Collection, it's not there to restore, if you like. And if I choose a waypoint, if I select My Collection and choose a waypoint from there, so let's say Battersea Park, and right click on that, the only option I have from there is to delete from My Collection. So when I'm within My Collection and I delete things, they delete permanently. So let's delete Battersea Park as well. So that's also been deleted. So I hope that's starting to come together a bit more now. Regardless of where we create waypoints, they all appear in My Collection and then they display in various lists. When you're working with waypoints, a sensible thing to do is to try and reuse them as much as possible. So, for example, the Kensington Gardens waypoint, if I wanted to use that in list 2, rather than recreate it, I can just go and copy it from My Collection, Kensington Gardens, right-click copy, and put that into list 2, and right-click paste. And then that's available for use there. And this is the same for routes and tracks. So again, if I select list 1 and let's create a route that goes from east to west. So let's go Tower Hamlets and go to Ealing, for example. That's now created the route, and that sits within list 1. Let's call it east to west, just so it's easier to see. There we go. And you'll see this also appears in My Collection. Routes and waypoints and so on don't take up a lot of memory. So when you're working with Basecamp, just delete them from the list and then they're available to use again later if you want. You can think of My Collection as a bit like a sort of recycle bin. Just to note, the routes and things we were making earlier. So for example, this one, if I just go show on the map where we were creating a route earlier in the video, that didn't appear in any lists because I hadn't created any lists at that point in time. So when I created that, it simply went into My Collection. Okay, so the additional lists you can see here, we've got last week and last month. These are known as smart lists, and they contain route data and waypoints that meet certain criteria. So last week contains everything that was created within the last week. So that's everything we've done today because that all occurred within the last week. And last month is everything we created within the last month. So you can imagine as you move on and progress with Basecamp a bit more, maybe you were working on something last week and you want to reference a waypoint from there. You can simply click on last week and find it within there rather than having to search through My Collection. The next thing you can create within here is what's known as a smart list. So I'll show you how this works now. So far the waypoints we've created lots that were in parks. So if I right click on this waypoint and choose Get Info, That brings up this box here, or I could also double click on the waypoint. It will do the same and show it on the map. So on the get info, this is the waypoint property. So if I go to references, it's showing that it appears in these lists, example folder 1, list 2, and we can also add a category. So we can add park to that. There we go. And Hyde Park from earlier, we've already categorized that as a park. And let's put Kensington Gardens and categorize that as a park as well. So we've added some metadata to those waypoints, and from there we can create a smart list. So if I right click on my collection and choose new smart list, it brings up this box here which says match the following rule. So we can say waypoint category is park. And now click on OK. And now we have this smart list that says category is park. And if I click on it, it shows every waypoint I've created where the category was park. So you can filter your waypoints in that way. And we could create another smart list. Right click and choose new smart list, and you can choose like waypoint symbol is a certain symbol, or list name is a certain list name, and then that will just sort of create a filtered view of your lists. That may or may not be of interest to you, but that's how it works. The list called unlisted data contains routes, tracks, and waypoints that don't belong to any other lists, but they still sit within my collection. And it's worth noting here as well that you can delete lists and folders as well, and the contents within them will still remain within my collection. So you don't have to be too hesitant about deleting lists and folders, because the data is always preserved within my collection. If you want to send an item from a list to your Garmin device, the easiest way to do it is to select the item, for example this route, right click on it and choose send to my device. And then you can choose the device or the SD card and click send, and it will send that to your device. I find that much better than dragging and dropping because I find it more precise. Equally, if you want to receive some data from the device, if you want to receive a specific item, you can click on the device and select perhaps waypoint, so maybe 135 Queen's Gate. You can copy that and then paste it into a list like so, and then that's now available to use in that list. If you want to do multiple things at once, you can go up to these buttons and click here, transfer down from the device, and you can take everything, routes, tracks, and waypoints, but that will pull a lot of data into Basecamp, which perhaps you don't want to really use. I would suggest doing it on a one-by-one basis. And equally, if you want to upload data to a device, you can select the list and click on up, and then choose all of these items to push up to the device at once. But again, I would just choose what you want to upload. If it's that route, right click and send that route to the device rather than doing it all at once. And that is an overview of the user interface for Basecamp for Mac. I appreciate that was a lot to take in, and there's a lot of different sections, but hopefully that will give you a fairly good grounding in what the buttons and controls and sections do, and that will help in the subsequent videos when we start to do some route planning using routes and tracks to do some more exciting and fun things with Basecamp. If this video has saved you time, energy, frustration, or perhaps even your relationship with your significant other, then there is a link in the description to send a donation via PayPal, and it's always appreciated. Thanks for watching, and remember to like, share, and subscribe.